My left hip, my left back, my left knee, my left ankle have been a freaking wreck for the past few years. And when I was fed up, I had enough, I reached out and I spoke with Connor Harris. Not only is he smart, he's thorough, he's helpful, and he knows how to adjust the exercises and the routine in such a way that as an athlete, I can progress from being screwed up to feeling amazing. And that has been my total experience with Connor. So if you're struggling with any kind of physical ailment or pain and you just need like the right little exercise to magically make that disappear, I'm telling you, the guy has a bag of tricks. Go check him out.
This case study is really cool for me because it must have been 15 years ago by now. I used to watch Elliott Hulse's YouTube channel on the daily, and I would watch his training tips, and I really admired the way that he worked out. And he was one of my staples on my YouTube subscriptions page, and I would watch his stuff all the time and really use his workouts a lot of the time too. So now fast forward 15 years later and I get an Instagram DM from him. It was pretty surreal to see that from someone I looked up to so much when I was growing up and just a kid. So we hopped on 2 Zoom calls. I'm gonna walk you through step by step what I saw because Elliott was presenting with a little bit of an interesting case that I think could be relevant for some of the people watching this, especially those that like to work out. Now, the biggest thing to know right off of the bat that Elliott had a right Achilles tear several years ago. Now, when you have an Achilles tear, that is such a traumatic injury to your lower body that you are not going to want to put body weight on that side. You're going to want to unconsciously and or consciously just shift over to the left side in some capacity so that way your right side can heal, obviously, but also even after you're done healing, you might not fully trust that leg. So Elliott was presenting a bit asymmetrical. So as a result of that, as you heard within his testimonial, he was dealing with quite a bit of knee, hip, and back pain, specifically lower back, and that left hip and the left knee were kind of bugging him a little bit every time he would push himself when he trained. So what I did was we went through a basic assessment. Now, the things that stood out to me the most with Elliott is that he had different measurements that didn't necessarily add up to me. What I mean by that is if I were to do a test that assesses, for example, someone's internal rotation capabilities on their hip, or it's somewhat of a reflection of internal rotation. Other tests that also are somewhat of a reflection of internal rotation and the capacity for internal rotation on that side of the pelvis should be of equal relative measurement to the other tests. What I mean by that is the following. So when we assessed his pelvis rotation, he had an easier time turning his pelvis to the left side, which indicates that he is turned to the left side and has an easier time moving his hips in that direction. Typically, when that's present, you have increased hip internal rotation on that left side, but he didn't. Typically, when that's present, you have a better straight leg raise on that side of your body. The reason for that is a straight leg raise is indicative of internal rotation of the hip on that side to some extent. It's not just a hamstring flexibility test. So generally, the side of the pelvis that's rotated back relative to the other will have a better straight leg raise. But this was not the case for Elliott. His left was actually significantly worse than his right straight leg raise. So that's kind of weird, right? What do we do with that? He felt like he was on his left side a lot, but he wasn't very good on his left side, which makes sense. Just because you're turned to one side of your body does not mean that you are good on that side of your body. It just means that's where you're turned. So Elliott was turned on his left side, but he wasn't good at being on his left foot and sensing the ground and really getting into his hip on that side. So his low back and knee were taking a beating to make up for the fact that he couldn't shift into his left hip. So what we did was we gave him a left posterior hip capsule stretch. Now, this is kind of weird because that is going to open up that space within the back of the left hip, but it's also going to turn the pelvis more to the left, which seems counterintuitive. If he's going left, why are you pushing him more left? Well, what we're trying to do is get him to genuinely shift left better before we then get him to better turn his hips to the right. So we opened up that space in his back left hip. And then what we did was a side-lying exercise. Activating his glute on the left to help push him from left to right more effectively. And this was really helpful for improving his pelvis rotation test. Now, it's very important within my methodology that we're not only able to shift into one side of our body and then out of it and into the other, but we need to do it with a foot that can work with the floor. There is key timing of the ability for the hips to be shifted into, with the foot being in certain positions. And Elliott had a hard time sensing the inside of his left foot because he was shifted to the left side. Imagine these are your foot arches. If I turn to the left, your foot arch is going to be higher on that side. It's going to be harder for you to find the inside edge of your left to push over to the right. So what we did was we gave him a specific exercise that would allow him to find that inside edge of his foot. So what we did was we gave him an exercise that activated the muscles to help his foot arch get closer to the ground when he walks. And that was pretty helpful as well. Now, before we started the second session, Elliott was feeling better and things were moving a little bit more smoothly when he trained. But we weren't 100% of the way there yet, because Elliott was good at shifting into his right side, but now he can't shift out of his right side. So before, what we did was better improve his ability to shift into his left and be able to push out of his left into his right. What we're missing is the ability for him to then get the joint actions necessary to push out of the right and effectively into the left. And because he'd been doing these exercises diligently for a couple of weeks, he was ready to then progress and get the ability for him to push out of his right back into his left. Now, the way we did this was with a side lying exercise. This is one of my favorite integrative activities, because what it does is it represents the joint actions of us pushing out of the right and abducting this leg and turning our pelvis to the left, using our right glute muscles like our glute max and glute med, and the left muscles that help us shift into that side like our adductors and our obliques. So we're really integrating a lot of muscles here, and this is not an easy exercise, but he did great with it because he's an athlete and he's really in tune with his body. So that was a very important aspect of getting Elliott to complete the cycle. Again, to recap, he was shifted over to the left, but he wasn't good there. So we got him to better get into his left side so that way he can push out of his left and into his right. After doing that for a while, we then needed him to get out of his right and then back into the left, so that way he can reciprocate and alternate and move from side to side effectively without his low back or knees taking a beating. And that foot exercise, which he was doing along the way, was really important for helping his hips work with his feet, because that connected his foot arch to the floor, and that's very important for getting in and out of your hips. If you want to learn more about my methodology, check out my biomechanics program. Because you watched this case study, I'm going to offer a 15% discount for either my beginner or my self-paced biomechanics course. I'll link that down below in the description.